Would you like more late season colour in your garden? Do you feel that once the roses of midsummer have dropped their petals, then the garden's just on the way down to winter? I've just been to visit a fantastic garden called the Salutation, which shows you that there's absolutely no excuse for saying, oh, the garden's over at any time of year, but most particularly now in the late season, where it's an absolute blaze of colour and structure and shape. And I've asked the head gardener at the Salutation, Stephen Edney, for his tips of what we amateur gardeners should do in our own gardens to get the same effect. It's Alexandra from the Middlesized Garden YouTube channel and blog, bringing you tips, ideas and inspiration for your garden. The Salutation was built in 1912, and both the house and the garden were designed by Edwin Lutyens, which is quite unusual because he used to work on the whole with the garden designer Gertrude Jekyll. Now, much of Edwin Lutyens' original layout remains, but of course not necessarily the planting. Restoring a historic garden or preserving a historic garden is very different from a historic house, because when it comes to plants, things grow, things change, things evolve. You may have new varieties, others may not be available. There are pests, diseases and climate to deal with. So a gardener like Steve Edney isn't going to say, what would Edwin Lutyens have planted here? He's more likely to say, how do I fit in with the character and spirit of Edwin Lutyens if he were alive today? And this can create some really exciting historic gardens, and I think the Salutation is one of them. The Salutation has over 400 different kinds of dahlia, and dahlias are undoubtedly a brilliant late season flower for colour and shape and imagination and verve and pizzazz and everything. The Salutation has a dahlia festival in the middle of September, but one of the great things about the garden is it shows you that late season gardens are about more than just dahlias. So Stephen, what do you think we should be planting apart from dahlias in our gardens?
But late summer for me and the colours, it's really important that I remember, just how important the foliage, and when we're thinking about colour, that we're not just thinking about flower, that I keep in mind that seed heads can play an important role, and actual shape and structure is incredibly important. For late summer perennials, one of my favourite actually that's bomb-proof and completely unfussy is probably the Persicaria tribe. So this is Persicaria amplexicaulis rosea, and basically Persicaria, the amplexicaulis types, hardy herbaceous perennials, will happily cope with -20. They'll cope with a range of conditions, from full sun to light shade, from very heavy wet soils to right through to light sandy and silty soils. I mean, Panicum frosted explosion is an annual grass, which is wonderful for flower arranging, but it will seed itself around for you. So if you're not keen on self-seeding annuals, then it's not one to try. In terms of tough perennial grasses that have wonderful seed heads, miscanthus, providing you've got enough moisture. So for us, we have to be careful where we place miscanthus, because they do prefer a heavier ground. They work very well on even heavy clay soils. So there's one called Malpartus, which is wonderful. Another form called Flamingo, which I just think is great. The Millennias, so if you've got a slightly drier soil, Millennia Karl Forster is just wonderful, but you do need a bit of space for it because it will be 2 meters tall. Cannas, they're so well known and easy to get hold of. And in southern England, I think unless you've got a heavy waterlogged soil, you can leave them out all winter just with a mulch. Now, we never cut our cannas back to the floor with clean cuts from secateurs in the autumn. I prefer to let the foliage get killed off by the frost, and then we bend the stems in on themselves to help protect the crown. A bit of a mulch, and actually, providing your soil is not waterlogged, I'd say your cannas would make it through almost every winter. So this is Canna Bethany. So it's a cultivated form that we came across a few years ago now. So it's not widely grown, and you do have to search for it if you want to buy it. But cannas, particularly these lovely striped forms, I think are fantastic because they look so good even when they're out of flower. And it's a really important point to remember, particularly in small gardens, when you're thinking about a flowering plant, you still need to give a lot of consideration to the colour of the foliage and the form of the whole plant, because you have to live with that plant for potentially months before you get to a flowering point. They are quite greedy, so they want lots of food, they want lots of water. So we always improve the soil and add tons of manure during the winter in order to get a really good display. And if people say that they're struggling with their cannas, then normally it comes down to either food or water.
One of the great things at the Salutation is the use of rare plants or unusual varieties of common plants. And I think most professional gardeners today would like to see us amateurs doing much more in the way of growing unusual plants. Now, unusual and rare does not mean difficult to grow. It just means difficult to buy. And one of the problems with all these top 10 lists of best plants for shade and best plants for drought is that really good plants that don't get on the lists may not be bought, and therefore they're not grown, and therefore diversity and choice dies down. The other thing is that every garden has its own little microclimate, and the Salutation, for example, is surprisingly close to the sea, so it can be quite coastal, quite windy, quite salty wind, and it's also in a very dry part of Kent. Now, looking at the abundance there, you would think, gosh, this is fantastic, this is a classic English garden, but actually it's gardening in quite difficult conditions, and rare and unusual varieties of plants can often deal with a specific condition better than something you might buy in any old garden centre. If you want to know more about buying and growing rare plants, I've got an interview with the Australian horticulturalist Stephen Ryan, so do check that out. There's a link in the description below, but also just simply look around for new and different varieties, and just don't be scared of that word rare. I know, I personally find it scary, but I think we just have to remember it just means you can't buy it very easily. If you've enjoyed this, do hit like, and then I'll know you'd like more expert interviews from professional gardeners. And if you haven't subscribed to the Middlesized Garden YouTube channel, we upload on Saturdays with tips, ideas and inspiration for your garden. Thank you for listening.